Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Welcome back to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, where today's guest is someone whose very presence in the world of school safety carries both the weight of history and the urgency of now. Chad Chaney is the manager of school safety for Florida Virtual School, where he oversees protection for over 250,000 students and supports more than 3,000 staff across the state. A retired law enforcement sergeant and U.S. Marine Corps veteran, Chad brings more than 25 years of experience across education, public safety, behavioral threat assessment, and crisis management. He is also a certified crime prevention through environmental design practitioner and an active leader with the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, serving on both state and national committees, including the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Commission's Threat Assessment Subgroup. But more than his credentials, Chad carries a visceral personal conviction shaped by his 2023 walkthrough of Building 12 at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, which is the preserved scene of one of the most tragic school shootings in U.S. history. That moment became a turning point, sharpening his focus and deepening his resolve to not only prevent violence, but to hold our systems accountable when they fail our students. Chad doesn't conflate trauma-informed education with leniency. Instead, his approach is rooted in strategy, precision, and collaborative care, where he works shoulder to shoulder with school psychologists, social workers, and counselors to ensure that trauma is recognized and addressed without compromising its safety. And today he's here to join us and talk about the intersection of safety, trauma, and leadership, and the courageous decision it takes to protect students not only from external threats, but from the silence and inaction that so often follow. Chad, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Chad, I wanted to go ahead as a Parklander and start with your experience in walking through Building 12, if you can. Chad and I were mentioning earlier that when I was a student at Stoneman Douglas High School, I was the first class of freshmen to have a full school year to walk through Building 12. That 30 classroom structure that had 3 stories first opened its doors in spring of 2009. I was in 8th grade. So that fall of 2009, I was the first class to have that building for a full year. And of course, all 4 years to follow through high school. Every single year, we have had nostalgic connections to what that building was like. And eventually it became home to a crime scene, and now it's ashes and dust. So, Chad, if you could walk us through your time going through Building 12 after the tragedy had happened 4 years later. Again, you described that moment as a reckoning with school safety. And could you tell us more about that experience and how it defines your approach to school safety?
Yeah, thanks for asking. A lot of people don't realize that that building was up for such a long time since the incident. And majority of the times, a lot of these buildings are demolished right afterwards because the murderer or the shooter is either taking their own life or they were taken out by law enforcement, right? So in this instance, the shooter was arrested, so they had to wait till the trials to go through. They had the shooter's trial, and they had the civil trial with the school resource officer. So they kept the building up just blocked off where kids were still attending the regular traditional school and walking by that building every single day. They just blocked it off. So once the trials were over, the Marty Stoneman Douglas parents had an opportunity to go through the crime scene themselves. And once they did that, they came out and basically said, we need to share this experience with as many educators, law enforcement professionals, and politicians as we can so this doesn't happen again. So Max Schachter, one of the parents of Parkland, he was the one that championed a lot of it. He invited a school safety specialist to be one of the first groups to go through the crime scene. And then I took the opportunity to go down there because I wanted to do my part. And when I went down there, it definitely changed my perspective of everything I look at, really. It's one of those things that nobody's ever been through. Anybody that's not involved in that actual incident, crime scene, they don't get an opportunity to go through it. So when they brought people through it, it was frozen in time. That's what people don't realize. There was laptops up. It was Valentine's Day, so there was hearts everywhere. It's just like a typical happy environment. but it's turned into a nightmare for these people. And there's glass on the scenes, glass everywhere, blood everywhere. And they walked us through each room where these kids were murdered. And they talked about the mistakes that were made. And then, I won't get into the graphic pieces of it, but once we finished the walkthrough, we had open dialogue with the parents and the spouses of the victims, and they expressed their frustrations, and they just wanted us to understand that the mistakes were made and how can we change it. And then, so what I did from that point on, I just took that to heart. I literally drove home. It was a 5 hour drive home. And that night I started writing down notes and I just started sharing my experiences with my own staff and team because I wanted them to know what I've seen so we can make changes. That's how it started, really.
What were some kinds of changes that you noticed that you could have started to implement instantly after that visit?
Well, the one is training, right? I think the training is big across everywhere. You always hear about professional development, especially in education. You always hear about PDs this, professional development this but there wasn't that much on school safety and threat assessments and behaviors and warning signs. There wasn't any of that information. So I had to get in front of my leaders, and it started with the trust. I had to share that experience with them because I wanted them to understand why we need this training and stuff. So it took a while, but we got buy-in, and they understand that it needed to be done. So that's one of the first things that happened was the training.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And I think when we talk about training, we're also applying that to the teacher level when we have educators that are acting as, for example, mandatory reporters and those who are trained in just student emotional wellness, or SEL as we call it, social emotional learning and wellness, as a way to sound alarms for the students' well-being. But even when they are trained and equipped with the tools to be informed in regulating students' emotions, sometimes teachers still find themselves dismissed or ignored by those above them when it comes to bringing forward concerns about their students. So, what advice do you have for teachers that are navigating these types of institutional failures, if you will, where it involves mandated reporting or giving tips to those above them about students that otherwise go ignored?
That's a great question. So I think it all stems from relationships when these teachers they're learning their kids. So if they have this built this relationship with these kids, they understand that the students maybe having a bad day. They can, if they know every day comes in with a smile, everything's fine, and then the next day it's just very reserved and quiet, and something's going on. So it's recognizing that there's something going on and addressing it. Hey, is there something going on? Just pull them to the side, and then if they realize that something doesn't seem right, they need to bring that to the attention, whether it's a school counselor, some type of administrator, because they're like, you know what, something is not right with so and so today, and I think it'd be benefit for somebody else to talk to them. And then if they don't get I guess, the reception from that person they're reaching out to, that's when they have to take it to another level. They have to understand their trust their instincts and say, you know what, something doesn't seem right. I need to go to another level, whether that's going to an administrator, going to the school resource officer, and bring it to their attention. Because at that point, it's on all those people to come together and say, okay, we need to do some type of intervention and speak up what's going on. And if you're still not, obviously you said the mandatory reporting. If there's something that's raising your attention, they need to report it to not only their leadership, but possibly Department of Law, Children and Families, or additional law enforcement outside their school. But in Florida, we're getting a little better, but they have to be able to speak up. They have to trust their instincts and they have to not stay quiet. They can't just let that suppress that feelings. They have to stand their ground.
And I think the problem with the way that our system has currently been set up, and I appreciate you telling us about that as well, is that sometimes teachers feel like their hearts are bleeding, but their hands are tied. And I got that same vibe even on the leadership level as well. When I used to come forward with, I had a student, for example, write me a suicide letter for her literacy fair poem in December. And the response that I got from leadership was, oh, your student's only 13. She doesn't understand what she's actually feeling. And when the FSA, the state tests are over in 5 months in May, she'll feel a lot better. So just put this to the side for now. As a teacher, when that's the type of response that you get, what steps do you take? And you're actually making me think now, Chad, maybe I should have gone to the SRO at that point, but I didn't. I didn't know what to do. I just kind of, I didn't know. What advice did you have for teachers that continue to face resistance and want to protect their position, essentially?
Well, again, like I said, it's difficult when you have 100 something kids, but if you take that time to learn about these kids, especially the kids that you identify that are maybe are going through something, take the time to show them that you care, right? And then get the feel for their baseline behaviors. If the kid is every day he's struggling and he's sleeping every day, then out of the norm, it's, if he's hyper, something else is going on that day. So you have to understand the baselines of these behaviors sometimes. And then you have to stay resilient. You have to keep that fire in you. And that's how I am when I, in my own work, when I'm dealing with leaderships or other organizations, I'm like, look, we can't stop. We're not until we get the answers we need. We need to dot our I's, cross our T's, and get to the root of the cause of what's going on with these kids. And if the teachers, if they're going to give up, then they're not doing their part. And I know that's hard for them to say, but it's just like, you know what? This is more important than getting an A in this class. And that's where a lot of the administration, especially in a lot of the brick and mortar districts, is they're dealing with they are dealing with a lot, but they want that A grade, right? And that's what they're focused on is academics. And that's where that started with the Marjory Stoneman Douglas is that they more worried about academics than they worried about school safety. So if kids don't feel safe at school, then they're not going to learn. So, and that's where you have to start that right at the bottom.
Perfect. I really appreciate that. And when it comes to what you've been doing throughout your time and working with behavioral threat assessments, what systems should be in place to act on behavioral threats before they become an issue when they're too late?
Um, Good question. I think the first thing is, I know we talked about this before, is that that's just Johnny being Johnny, right? Oh, that's just him. No, that's not Johnny being Johnny. There's something going on there, so we need to find out what it is. A lot of times when you do these interviews with these kids or the counselors are talking to them, they unpack so much, right? They find out that mom and dad are getting divorced, or he hasn't seen dad in 3 years, and now they've introduced some other person in their life, and it's just a lot of these different stressors going on, and that's where that chronic stress starts getting involved. So I think that's one of the things is just understanding that don't dismiss something if it doesn't seem right. You need to look at it right then. And even the smallest little thing needs to be addressed. Now, it might not be anything, but we've looked at it, we've investigated it, we've followed through with everything. And if there's an intervention needs to be put in place, we put an intervention in place, whether it's a small one or it ends up being a lot bigger, which sometimes it does. So that's probably the first thing I would recognize. And then not to get too deep into school shooting type stuff, but leakage is one of the biggest things is that there was a study done. I'm not going to quote the research on it, but pretty much 100% of all school shooters have leaked their information to somebody else that they were going to do it, but they were going to, whether it's via internet, talking to somebody. Like I know we talked about this before, is that somebody mentioned to somebody else that he looked like he'd be a school shooter or he was acting like just based on his behaviors, right?
Mhm.
So there's always some type of almost like a red flag that wasn't addressed in a lot of these situations. So they need to go with their gut feeling and they need to bring it to somebody's attention.
Mhm. I appreciate that. And when it comes to teachers that are working with administration that seems to lean into the systemic failures rather than help them, I've noticed that some things that have helped me, I've been going to other trusted colleagues, especially if it's around a student. I'll go to other colleagues that share that student that I know maybe get along with me or the child and say, we're not working against the student. We're here to form a village for them, form a village so they have a network all day long of people checking in on them. It's like if I'm period two, in the morning, I'll go to the teacher they have for lunch and maybe their sixth period just to say, let's work as a team to keep eyes on the student all day long to make sure that they're feeling safe and being safe during the school day. What are some other strategies and networks that teachers can use to protect our students?
You said it right there. It's collaboration talking about it. You find out that there's five other teachers that are dealing with this kid. Go to them and talk to them. Say, hey, you have your own team meeting, bring together and say, hey, how can we support this kid? Are you seeing these same type of behaviors in the class? And if they are, then obviously it's not just your class. Or it could be, maybe it is your class, and maybe it's something that you need to change, whether it's moving the seat or bringing some type of intervention in your classroom. But if you're not sharing that information, that's kind of where the threat assessment process is multidisciplinary, bringing everybody together, talking about strategies, how to help these. It's not about punishment, it's about prevention. So it's about providing resources and services, and you bring that version to supporting these kids. And that's how you get them back on track. And it's helping the families as well. It's not just leaving the kids. What's going on in the family? That's when you get the social worker involved and say, okay, is there any resources that the family could have? That I found out they're living in a hotel. Okay, what can we do to try to lessen that stress on these kids to get them back on track?
Perfect. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
And the work that you're doing now is also spanning into online learning environments as well. So, with your leadership going from both virtual and physical learning spaces, and I know teachers here in 2025 have probably had a good combination of each, especially after 2020. What are some different challenges or even opportunities that you've noticed between those two spaces, especially with the online presence and how to identify and intervene with student crisis at that level?
Biggest thing is you don't have eyes on them every day. If you have that baseline behavior of a kid walking in the classroom and he's all hyper, and he's just, a good open kid, right? And then you don't have that same opportunities in a virtual environment. So a lot of these kids are off camera. Teachers, a lot of times they don't require them to be on camera. You're dealing with some kids that are isolation. They have anxieties. And so you don't get to see that baseline behavior. And that's one of the big things is that you just don't know if he's having a bad day or not. You don't know if he didn't sleep last night. You don't know if he has bags under his eyes. You just don't get that opportunity. If you have a kid that you see every single day and he seems to shuffle, and maybe didn't get a chance to change his clothes in the same clothes every day, something's not right with that kid, but you don't have that opportunity in the virtual world. Also, a lot of times when kids get expelled, they get sent home, right? And there's no eyeballs on them at that point. Similar to a workplace environment when they do a hasty firing and they just fire somebody, now you don't have eyeballs on them. So now we don't have eyeballs on this kid from a daily check in with them, right? With a
Mhm.
counselor or a supervisor or somebody just to check in with them. You don't have that. Now you have a kid that possibly is at home by himself, not supervised, in front of an internet and isolated. And look at the opportunities they have to do other things that they shouldn't be doing. So that's kind of the challenges. The opportunities are you get to collaborate with multi districts, right? I deal with every single district throughout the state. You deal with a lot of law enforcement throughout the state. So I get a chance to learn and to share information. And that's one of the big things for me.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. And based upon our conversation from today, what would you say is a major takeaway that our listeners can come forward with or even come away with in terms of practices that they can now start to implement at the beginning of the new school year?
Well, I don't know if it's but I'm anti social media for these kids at a certain point, right? I think the social media has changed the landscape of parenting in general. My kids are adults now, but they didn't have to deal with it. But setting boundaries, I think that's one of the big things is that I talk to some of these parents about if the kid's on his cell phone at 11 o'clock at night, there's nothing positive at 11 o'clock at night for them to be playing on the internet, right? So unless they're studying for some exam, they need to set boundaries. Take the phone away from them at night. It's a privilege, right? So they got to trust their instincts. And a lot of times they just hand them the phone and that's it. It's like a little tool for them and they just go away. But they need to learn about it. They need to learn about keeping their kids safe on social media and monitoring them. And that's the thing. And a lot of them do. And if you hear about a lot of these incidences, that, oh, I didn't know my kid did this. Well, why don't you? Why are you allowing them to be unsupervised at home and on the internet? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we deal with now with a lot of the parents. You deal with a lot of online threats. Well, they didn't know they're not monitoring their kids' social media. They're not monitoring what they're doing online. And there's so many tools that the parents can have access to. And we try to teach them as much as possible, but they have to take ownership in that. And that's one thing that the schools need to do a better job as well, and to provide the opportunities for the parents to learn about the challenges with social media.
And what do those tools and opportunities look like for parents?
I mean, I could share a lot of the tools with you, but we call it digital threat assessment, but there's a school safety type of sites that we have multiple links on where it teaches them about like Instagram. It teaches them about Snapchat and what to look for and how kids can hide things. There's applications that they can hide, like the calculator app, right? Where they can hide. It's like a window. It leads into other different little rooms and stuff in their phones. A lot of these kids are hide stuff in these applications. So there's so many opportunities that I can share, but there's so many that I can't even count how many they are that are very valid.
Is it something that we can put into our show notes?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Perfect.
definitely. Yeah, I can definitely
Well,
send it to you.
awesome. Thank you for that. We'll definitely take a look at those and include those. And one thing that I've learned over time as a teacher as well is to really focus on, we always talk about relationships, but I found that the most important relationships come from the peer-to-peer connections to start with. I'm thinking now, like, how many classes did I have after eighth grade from high school through graduate school where I walked into the classroom and by the end of my time, if not significantly sooner, know the names of every single student in that room with me. And it was very, very few. And I'm remembering now that the ones were the classrooms where I did know the most people who were there, where they were visible, they were human, they were beyond the number. Those are the ones that I did the best in. Those are the classes that I performed the best in. And I think once you have students connect with each other and watch out for one another, then they can build that whole relationship with the classroom. So when we say that whole tacky, oh, I'm building a family, you really have to do exactly that, where You're getting the students to become family members in order to make the whole classroom thrive to its best potential. That's what I've learned as well over time.
No, that's the peer-to-peer mentorship is building a little bit now. It's starting to get a little bit more popular, but it's when I was a kid, that's all you had. We didn't have social
Yeah.
media. So you had your peers. Everybody was like, "Oh man, where's Johnny at today? He's not here," you know. So you're right. Everybody knew they went to their families' houses, they played in the yards, and everybody wasn't isolated like they are now. So you're right. There's that built culture that the teachers have to show ownership, the leadership has to show ownership, parent. It's like a village, right? Everybody has to take ownership in that. But who is responsible for doing that? We are as adults and parents and teachers and educators to bring these tools to the kids. And so they understand that and bring it back to reality. And I think that you're right. It's missing piece right now. And you've said it right when you knew every one of your kids in that class. That shows that you cared about them. And you've seen those videos where those teachers have those handshakes to every one of their kids, right? And that positive relationships. Those kids understand. They know every day that they feel loved and they know that they're safe. And that's what we need to build back again.
And it definitely holds students accountable for each other. I remember my very first year, there was a student who was very distraught one day, and I found that it was because her boyfriend had attempted suicide the night before. And it was her close friend from that class that came to my desk and said, "Hey, so and so's having a hard day. Why don't you just make sure that you check in on her on the way out?" So now the students are being accountable for each other. And that was huge.
Yeah, that's having those identifying those leaders at that level and say, hey, I need some help here. We need help to make sure we're keeping eyeballs on everybody, making sure. But you have to give them the tools as well to how to address it, right? So and show them what to look out for. So that's a good idea.
Thank you for that. Any final thoughts for listeners?
We're all in this together, and that if something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't right. So it needs to be brought to the attention of somebody else that's in a position to address that.
Thank you so much for that, Chad. So that was Chad Chaney here to remind us that school safety isn't about metal detectors and discipline codes. It's about the people and about having the courage to intervene early, have the humility to self-reflect, and the willingness to stand in the difficult space between both crisis and prevention. Whether you're a teacher who feels unheard, an administrator balancing competing demands, or a policymaker with the power to shift the system, Chad's message is clear that we all have a role in this work. And that role must begin with accountability, collaboration, and an unflinching commitment for us to live as a system. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.